Hello, everyone, and welcome to my interview series. Today, we have a guest that we've had before, Mark Schaub from Kingwood and Mallisons. I wanted to have Mark back on because we've had these changes with the announcement of big changes to animal testing requirements for China. And Mark obviously has watched this space very closely. So thank you so much for coming back, Mark.
Thanks, Ali.
So today, let's dive right in. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the key changes that will affect independent beauty brands or any beauty brands coming into China that are cruelty-free?
Yeah, so like you said, I mean, people have been waiting for a long time. I think the first article I wrote about, the end of animal testing getting nearer was, I think, 12 years ago. So it's been a long time coming. And I guess it's not a surprise that it's not really a hard end. It's more exemptions are opening up. So I think, the best way to encapsulate it is, back in 2014, there was the exemption for some types of domestic products. If it was domestically manufactured, if you got an exemption, you didn't have to do animal testing. That's now been extended to imported products for the first time. But it does require you to have a QMS, which is like a GMP type certification from your country of origin. And you also need to do a safety assessment, which is acceptable to the NMPA. So, I think this is the start of a pathway. But, I guess the major hurdles is that for the QMS, there's nothing really in place yet. It'll be bilateral. I think the French government has said that they've already got something in place, but as far as we can tell, the Chinese haven't recognized it. And we're not fully sure what the safety assessment is, but I guess we can look at what was happening in the domestic arena, and probably that will give us a bit of guidance.
Okay, yes. And the thing with the GMP or the QMS is the fact that from what I understand, the NMPA have said that it needs to be certified by the government of the authority of the government of the market in which you manufacture. So if you manufacture in multiple markets, then you need, we think, as far as I understand, you need several different.
Well, I think it's only the one. So let's say if you're a beauty brand and you manufacture in Mexico, Australia, and France, then if you're going to supply the Chinese market from Mexico and France, those two manufacturers would have to be certified. Okay. So for Australia, because I think one of the issues will be probably because of the geopolitical situation at the moment, probably Australia will not be first cab off the rank when it comes to these kind of things.
Yes, exactly. So yes, the fact that it's all government, it needs to be authorized by the government of the country you're manufacturing in. There's a lot of scope, and the Chinese have to accept that process. So as you mentioned, the French have obviously, they've announced that they have that process. From what I've seen as well, I don't think the Chinese have fully rubber stamped it yet. I think the British are also in the process of negotiations, but again, that hasn't been completely rubber stamped yet. So it's all supposed to come into play from the 1st of May, is what I understand.
Yeah, 1st of May, it's possible to do it. I mean, I don't think there'll be, I think, somebody asked me, I think, well, how will we find out which countries are able to do it? I said, I'm sure if you just read the news, you'll find out, because there'll be a lot of announcements.
Yeah.
So I think the front runners seem to be the French and perhaps the Koreans and the Japanese. I think the other problem will be for people that are a good brand in a country where it's not a major type of industry, they might take longer. So if you're a Finnish beauty brand, maybe it's not the top priority for the Finnish government. So it's going to be a lot of teething issues. It's going to take a lot of time until it gets resolved.
Absolutely, and from what I've heard as well, for the US, of course, things like that are done on a not necessarily on a federal level. So you've got that extra complexity between the states and a federal level. So yes, I think, as you said, we need to wait and see. But in terms of cruelty-free, so something that I know you've worked on in the past is the pilot project, where brands can come in, they can manufacture locally through a specific project with Cruelty-Free International, and that exempts them from any possibility of post-market animal testing. So with this new regulation, what do you think will happen with post-market animal testing, if anything?
Yeah, see, I'm not really sure if that's true, the post-market animal testing. I think post-market animal testing my understanding, it's various different authorities can do it. And as far as I know, it hasn't happened for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's not banned, and so I think there are beauty bloggers and cruelty-free organizations that take a very hard stance on Postmarket. But as far as I know, I think the US also still has those kind of regulations in place for human health and safety. I mean, obviously, there's no need to do it, but it's still on the books. So I don't think this addresses that. I think, we have to also realize it, still allows, you can't use this if you've got a special use cosmetic, so something with skin whitening or bleach or something like that. And also if it's targeted at children or infants. So, it's not an explicit ban on animal testing. It's more certain categories can get an exemption. So I think we shouldn't, overmarket it. It's the right direction, but it's not, the end position, I think.
Absolutely, it's not complete. There are quite a few exemptions, as you said. Yes, the baby and anything to do with children and infants is quite a big exemption. So is SPF, for example. Yes, anti-acne. There are a lot of exemptions, but it is a good step in the right direction. So in terms of brands preparing for this now, like if anyone's wanting to start the preparation, what would you advise is the next step? Just wait, or is there something that they can do now?
Well, look, like I said, I think the first article I wrote was 14 years ago or 12 years ago, and that's a long time to wait. It's a bit like real estate in Shanghai. If you wait, you might be waiting a long time. I think what will happen is, you mentioned like the Leaping Bunny or those pilot projects or other ones. There's no magic to it. It's nice, the Leaping Bunny ones, there's some oversight and people are checking things, perhaps more carefully. I would think what we will see is actually there'll be a bit of a media or an awareness that China's changing. And counterintuitively, I think more of those smaller brands will be willing to go and do the domestic production because, to tell you the truth, the other thing I think is, probably at some stage, it'll be a bit like the abattoirs or some things like honey, and also, of course, infant formula is probably the most similar, where the Chinese did open up to having certain factories overseas certified. So they actually did the inspections. Here it seems a bit softer. But what happened in the end of that infant formula? Sure, they made it easier to import, on paper, but in the end, all those big infant formula companies ended up doing local production here in China. I think, so I think the thing is, the trend is okay. It will really depend on, the beauty organizations and, beauty bloggers like yourself, whether you feel now, is it enough? The post-market thing, I think, is an issue. I personally don't think it's really an issue because, as far as I know, they haven't done it for a long time. And whether people have confidence to do it, and that the perception is that it's still cruelty-free. Because for a lot of perhaps beauty bloggers in particular, selling in China, except through cross-border e-commerce, it's shorthand for animal testing.
Yeah.
And so I guess now it's that's become a little bit grayer, and it's a little bit more complicated to look at.
Yes, I think that's something that brands struggle with, especially brands that have a really strong stance, and that's part of their brand DNA. Because, as you said, people that are not very informed about the China market, they think that if you're selling in China at all, then you are effectively testing on animals. So this gives another route. It gives us another way for brands to explain, but at the same time, it's still explaining, right? We're not the press isn't that China has banned animal testing. It's still more nuanced than that. So I think that's a tricky piece. I agree about the manufacturing in China. I think brands that have that sort of size, medium-sized brands that can do that, we will see more brands doing that for many reasons, as well as the animal testing aspect. So
so I think those medium brands too, what they'll probably do is, I think part of the whole thing is, that new law which came into effect, last year, 1st of January this year, that law overhauled something which was, back from the Berlin Wall was still there. It was back from '89 or something. So there's been a big change, and I think part of it is it's a more sophisticated liability chain. And so, you'll see that one of the other exceptions is the responsible agent, the manufacturer, or the brand can't be on a watch list. And I think that's one thing which a lot of companies perhaps haven't really fully realized is you'll have more market access, but you're going to be potentially much more likely to be on the hook for liability. And I think responsible agents in the past were just always an afterthought. And now I think anybody who's really responsible would not want to be a responsible agent, because you really do inherit a lot of liability. So I think for a lot of those medium brands that you say will perhaps venture and have a outsourcing the manufacturing, they'll probably have to set up something in China in order to act as a responsible agent and take some responsibility for the production and keep an eye on things as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think when you're choosing a distributor in China, it's tricky enough as it is anyway to find someone that you can trust, that you can feel you can look after your brand. But now with this added sort of responsibility of the responsible agent, the watch list, there's a whole load more things that brands need to consider with their partners that they choose. So I think that's another thing.
I mean, I would never, that would be just some advice on that, just as a side. I would never really recommend that your distributor is your responsible agent, because, when that beautiful relationship ends, this gives a lot of leverage and a lot of complexity. And especially now that these, registrations will be for many, many more companies, you really would want to have your own team or somebody neutral. So, but the problem is, I think, a few years ago, you would find neutral parties or consultants who would do it, but I think they're not going to really like doing it because it puts them in a very high risk position.
Exactly.
And,
yeah. Very tricky. And no one knows sort of how the government's going to regulate that, right? It's a big unknown in terms of how strict they're going to be and things. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think
we have to also say, look, a lot of the, just on that also, because sometimes people talk about the Chinese government being very strict. Yeah, one of the reasons why they're strict, it might be that it's a bit of a trade barrier, but to be fair, a lot of cosmetic companies have also been tricky and naughty. And, especially because new ingredients is one of the things which is a carve out. So if you've got a new ingredient in, it's not unheard of that, cosmetic companies, supplement companies, they kind of didn't tell the truth about what was in their product in order to align with Chinese requirements. So I think, even if I was a consultant, I'm not really sure if I can trust everybody who tells me what's in the product. So that's why it's a bit, there's also oversight. It's not just for no reason. I think there's legitimate reasons to keep an eye on.
Sure, of course. And actually, there's one other thing about this new regulation that I've had brought up to me about the amount of information that the brands are going to have to give over to the authorities in terms of formulation, in terms of also including the suppliers of their ingredients. I don't know whether that's something that you've seen in the legislation, or that's more of a rumor.
I think the formulations, that kind of information was always required whenever you're doing it. And probably before, most cosmetic brands that you're dealing with didn't do it because they couldn't do registration because that would involve animal testing. So, that really is shorthand for animal testing, is if you had an NMPA registration, you had animal testing for sure. So I guess that's the first thing. People aren't used to it because they didn't do it in the past. I think with the suppliers, that's going to be something now complicated. It seems that China's not just looking at that first level, they're looking at the underlying safety of the ingredients. And, I haven't worked it out all myself in my head, but there'll be a lot of IP issues about the formulations of these new products. So you have some time where you will be kind of like the monopoly, like a kind of a mini patent. But these will be complicated issues because whoever first applies to the new ingredient, they'll effectively get a monopoly for China on that kind of ingredient. So that's a complicated issue that hasn't been fully resolved yet.
Yeah, I think it's an issue for the new ingredients because obviously they want to know, but also for the existing legislation. Or is it only on the new ingredients that they're going to have to give that level of detail?
I think it's only going to be on the new ingredients because the old ingredients are already tried and tested, and
Yeah. Okay. So that's another thing for brands to think about. IP is always, as we talked about last time, IP is always an issue that people associate with China, and obviously trademarks is a big one, but this is an extension of looking after your IP. So yes.
So I mean, that's something which I want to look at when I got some time. I'm going to talk to our patent guys, because it's not really a patent. It's really more that you've given this confidential information to the NMPA, and they give you some kind of right of exclusivity for a period of time. I don't even know how those things coincide. So, it's a complex issue. Probably not for the beauty brands as much as the suppliers. So probably the big chemical companies, this will be an issue for them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's all going to be a bit of trial and error from the 1st of May as brands start to go down this process, and so I'm sure we'll have more opportunities for updates as it happens. But I think that was great today to get a bit of an update and your point of view on that. So thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Ali.